gorgeous. I want to talk to you today about something that I don't generally address. Now, it is one of my 12 bombshell pillars, if you're familiar with my pillars of a biblical bombshell, but it's not something that I tend to spend a lot of time and energy teaching women about. And yet in the last year, God has absolutely, and when I say that, I mean unavoidably, brought this topic to the forefront of my attention. And that is the importance of women being financially independent. Now, there is a lot of stress around money, isn't there? And there is a lot of teaching and training, particularly in the Christian world, about how we should think about money and how we should deal with money. And a lot of it is based around where we are in our lives. If you are a student, if you are in debt, if you are or aren't married, we hear things like husbands and wives should be one in every way, including financially. We hear that as wives, we should be submissive to our husbands, and that often is translated into being completely under his financial authority and therefore kind of in alignment with his priorities completely. We hear things like God will provide for all of our material needs, and so we don't really need to focus on money. Rather than not just worry about it, we don't need to even think about it. But the problem is that in order to do God's will, we need resources. Now, sometimes, absolutely, they are supernaturally dropped on our lap. But far too often, we are actually asked by God to go out and create them or to take some kind of action so that He can open doors. Often that looks nothing more than just like excellent stewardship, which means we know what we're doing, we're taking consistent action doing it, and we're disciplined in that action. So what I want to talk to you about today is how you might be being called to become more financially independent. You know, as a life coach, I have been privy to some of the most beautiful and some of the most horrific things you can imagine. In this past year, I have watched as members of the same family screamed at each other in front of other family members, wanting it documented that their desire was to financially ruin their other family member and bring a lawsuit against them. I have seen as members of the same family have been controlled, whether that person was in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s, by an older or another family member, manipulated because that person was the source of their income and their funding. And they have had to walk on eggshells to keep this difficult person happy because that was where their income was coming from. The problem with money is that we often see it as just this cut and dry, how we pay the bills kind of thing. But particularly for women, money is deeply combined with the whole idea of power. And that makes it a very scary thing. And understandably, because we've seen money used by people who are very powerful with it all around the world in some horrible, horrible ways. But imagine this. What if a large amount of income was available for people who were about to do the good will of God, who wanted to bring God's kingdom to earth now and do the work that it requires and use the resources that it does take to do good things here and now, rather than people who have perhaps not so great intentions? That's how charities work, you realize, is they are run by donations. Somebody has to have the income to be able to fund a vision, even if they are just giving that to someone else who's going to actually do the logistical work. But there's also the ability to be personally financially backed, to not have to go out and sell the concept really to someone or try to get them on board with a calling that may be only in that one person's heart. When you're independently financially backed, you are unstoppable for God because you don't have to go out and convince people to get on board with you. You can start to create a vision, and then as it begins to come to life, maybe then others say, oh, now I see what you were doing. Now I completely get it. I'm starting to see the picture that you were talking about, but I didn't fully understand it. Now I'm seeing it ahead of me and I'm on board. Or maybe they never get on board. But you don't need them to because you have the resources that you need by taking the action that God's put on your heart and that allows Him to bring in supernatural help to accomplish His will in your life and fulfill His assignment. It's unfortunate but true that the work is great, but the laborers are few. And what I often see is laborers who are very willing to go out and do the work of God, but are stopped in one area or another. And often we're sitting around waiting for a miracle to happen. We're waiting for a big check to come in the mail so we can go out and start that charity, that side business, that ministry that God has put on our heart. But that's a lot like waiting for God to drop a new supernaturally healthy body or a miracle healing on us rather than just starting to attend to our nutrition and regular exercise and excellent sleep in order to get to better health so that we're able to do his work. I want you to start thinking that way about your finances. Where have you maybe been avoiding this often very scary topic where women have not traditionally been trained to pay attention to it? We have often been the stay-at-home woman, the stay-at-home mom, the young girl who's trained for that profession, while the man is the breadwinner and he brings the money home. Maybe the woman runs the budget, maybe she doesn't even touch that, but when she swipes the credit card, it does work, so everything must be okay, right? I want to challenge you as a godly woman who is stewarding every area of her life as a biblical bombshell to step out of that mentality and into a more intentional relationship with this incredibly powerful resource that God has made available to us. So what is it that you might need to do? Is it a debt that keeps accumulating because you don't want to look at what you're spending? Is it a level of manipulation and control that other family members might still have on you because they are funding your existence? Is it a dream or a project that you need to start putting aside a little bit of extra income towards so that you can self-fund that? I want you to be empowered and given the courage to start creating financial independence. Now, I'm not saying start building up money so that you can go divorce your husband or take some exotic vacation for no particular reason. I'm saying start looking at the power that you could have to another level. Bring the kingdom here now and do God's will if you were self-backed in the things that he's called you to do. This is, again, a very scary area for many people, but I am more convinced than ever that God's women are being called to step into this area with savvy, with godliness, with humility, with a mindset of excellent stewardship, but also a mindset of initiation and action taking, of being intentional and going for something rather than waiting and seeing just what happens and hoping that everything works out. You have more power as a woman in this day and age, in this first world area. If you're watching this video, you probably have more resources than you realize, and you can be such a force in doing God's work, but often we need those resources. So I just want you to think about this, and I would love to hear in the comments, what has your experience been around money and financial independence? Have you seen families fighting? Have you seen manipulation? Have you seen avoidance and denial and massive debt? Have you been in the middle of it, unfortunately? Have you maybe just been perfectly comfortable but not realizing how much you could do to help bring about God's will in the world if you took a little more action in this area? I'd love to hear your thoughts around this very, very tricky topic of money. And I would love you to start looking at your life and saying, how could I start to begin to establish a certain level? You don't need to replace a full-time salary. You don't need to retire your husband. You don't need to bring in millions, but start to create a little bit more financial independence. Maybe it's just so that you can take off the burden of certain expenses from the income that does go toward the normal family expenses and bills and utilities. Maybe it's so that you can start to fund this side project or ministry that God has put on your heart. Maybe it's so you can give more to a charity than you ever thought you could. Whatever it might be, I want you to start thinking more powerfully and more intentionally about being in control of the money that God has put at your disposal and of the ability that he's given you to create it and steward it and manage it well for his purposes. This is such an important area, and I really think we have been lacking in the attention that we pay to it. Certainly in my teaching, I have not brought it up before, so I want this to be maybe a little nudge for you to start addressing this important area and moving into a position where you can be a powerful player in doing God's important work in the world by bringing the resources forth that are needed to do it. God bless you, gorgeous. I can't wait to hear what you think about this. I'd love to know your experiences around money and financial independence, and let's get the conversation started.
you.